We're at the top of the hour, so why don't we go ahead and get started? Thank you all for coming here and for being at this wonderful event. We're so grateful to have you here. To all of those in person and to the hundreds who have joined us online, welcome to this event. You represent many different areas of work, including the government, philanthropy, policy, industry. And here we're here to talk about WISE, W-I-S-E, the Water Insecurity Experience Scales. And this is a breakthrough event during an inflection point for policy and international development communities to be discussing some of the most complex and challenging issues that are facing water insecurity. And that includes individuals, it includes communities, it includes countries, and globally. Now, for the past decade, Gallup has been at the vanguard of developing, standardizing, and measuring many of these metrics that capture humanity. And that includes 4 Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, or indicators. And at Gallup, we're kind of impact snobs. I don't know, maybe I shouldn't have said that. But we kind of think if we're just measuring something and it's not doing anything, we're not interested. We want to be a part of something that's actually going to create positive change and have societal impact. I think many of you feel the same. So we're in a good company. And this is something where we leverage the unique asset of Gallup called the World Poll, which has nationally representative samples of over 140 different countries. And only about a third of them do we do online surveys. We go and we speak face-to-face with people in the middle of nowhere of these countries, and we make sure, and even then we use very standardized methodology. We won't talk to the person who answers the door. We need to talk to someone else in the house. So we're very thorough on this. And we're trying to address the biggest data gaps in the world. And we've worked with the world's leading individuals and organizations to be able to do this. And things that we've been addressing are some of those topics include modern slavery, safety, financial inclusion, and food insecurity. And speaking of food insecurity, we also helped develop and supported the development of the Food Insecurity Experience Scales, or FIES. In Italy, I've been told they pronounce it FIES. It's not Fies and Wise, it's FIES. And it's a tool developed by the Food and Agricultural Organization, or FAO, in collaboration with Gallup. And the wonderful thing about this tool is not only does it measure the prevalence of food insecurity globally, but it has also served as a playbook for international validation and recognition of the salience of the Water Insecurity Experience Scales. So this is something where it's served as a great model. And we appreciate Sara Viviani for attending this event with us in person from the Voices of the Hungry team. So thank you for being with us here today. Now, in the same way that we've helped support the FAO and their journey to get the FIES, or FIES scale adopted as SDG indicator, I've got it written down here, 2.1.2 in 2015, we were delighted to hear on just this past Sunday that the vehicle for collaboration between the WHO and UNICEF, which is called the Joint Monitoring Program, formally recognized the WISE scales as a gender-specific indicator for the WASH monitoring under SDG targets 6.1 and 6.2, and for monitoring efforts at national and global levels. Now, if water is life and data is power, we hope these new gender-specific indicators start to make a difference and help us take action and start to signal some of the first things that we can do and address critical gender imbalance globally. Now, we're thrilled that we as Gallup got to contribute a small part of this. And we know that term, it takes a village to raise a child. So if Professor Young is the matriarch of the WISE scales, many of you in this room and online are the aunts and the uncles and the cousins not the ones we don't want to talk to, the ones we want to talk to these scales and indicators. And you've seen them as they've grown from infancy to adulthood. And now we have an additional vital tool that can help us not just shape the future, but make sure that it's shaped the right way. For myself personally, I'm the managing partner for the EMEA region where we work with organizations. So I don't do a lot of work with all of you on this. I sit and I admire it from afar. But the work that you guys do, the work we do around food insecurity, around modern slavery, helps me wake up every day wanting to do the work I do. And we are cheering you on. You make us proud at Gallup to be a part of this. And we really are grateful for all of the work that you're doing. It matters and it makes a difference. With that, and without further ado, I'm going to introduce our keynote speaker, Tim Wainwright, CEO of WaterAid.
Hello, everybody. Very nice to see actually a lot of people I recognize in the room. So it's lovely to be surrounded by new friends and old. And hello to everyone online. Really nice to have a big online audience too. And thank you for that introduction, Jeremie. Yes, I am also an impact snob. And in fact, the entirety of what I'm about to say to you now is all about how we can turn this fantastic data set into impact and action. But thank you, first of all, for having me. I'm delighted to be speaking at this event. Actually, going way back, those of you who know me might not know this, but I once used to call myself a mathematician. I don't anymore, but that was the subject I studied. So I'm always a fan of a good data set and doing something interesting with it. So we're here to reflect on the impact of the WISE Scales impact report, which is, of course, as you all know, it's all about measuring the personal experience of water insecurity. And I think that's really useful and really important. It helps get under the skin of the problem that sits behind the global water crisis. And I know it's kind of like, I wouldn't be doing my job. I know all of you know this, I think, but we are in the middle of a global water crisis. Yes, progress has been made, depending on how you measure it, but sort of since the year 2000, more than 2 billion people have gained access to water. Great. But I think a recent study, for instance, suggested that there might be 5 billion without it by 2050 because of issues like climate change, rapid urbanization, and so on. So we're in a one step forward, two steps back situation. And I think the other thing that's really worries me about the situation we find ourselves in is that the world is not taking the water crisis remotely seriously enough. Again, you probably know that already. Which is why it's quite unusual for me to spend time talking to a water audience. So it's a little bit to do with the whole message I'm giving you now. I spend most of my time attending meetings and speaking at meetings when I'm outside my organization that are not focused on water. So why is that? Well, partly because if you go to a water-focused meeting, you can end up just agreeing with each other and complaining about why the rest of the world doesn't understand. But it's also because where I'm trying to put my efforts is in key sectors that should be thinking much more seriously about water than they currently are. So this is like the health sector, climate meetings, engaging with the private sector, and so on. And so I'm being a bit disparaging. These sectors not taking water. Well, maybe is that fair? Is that unfair? So let me back that up with a few statistics. So if you look at climate finance, water is at the heart of how climate change affects the human race. It's mostly too much or too little, floods or droughts. 2% of climate finance currently going to water, and a good deal less on wash. Think about the healthcare sector. So at the moment, half of healthcare facilities in the world lack the basics that equip healthcare professionals to wash their hands in between examining patients, half of them. If you go to that's everywhere. If you go to developing countries, it's a good deal more. I'll give you a quick example. I was visiting northern Ghana and a healthcare centre in Bongo, which is very close to the border with Burkina Faso. It's in that very northern Ghana area, which many of you probably know. Very remote. And seeing the huge difference that it makes to women who are travelling huge distances to deliver babies. And I was seeing a positive example. I was seeing something after an implementation I'd made where, the toilets were great, the piped water to the point of delivery, soap available, etc. But a real reminder of just the extraordinary. I mean, it's the 21st century. It's very hard to get water to every household. We all know that is a challenging target. But to get it to institutions like a healthcare facility, for half of them not to have that is just ridiculous. And then if you look at the engagement with the private sector, well, again, some stats. We all know there's not enough investment in the water sector. But if you look at the whole water sector, not just the wash sector, but the entire water sector, and you look at low-income countries, the level of investment from the private sector in a sector like telecoms, which is very developed for private sector engagement, is 87% of the total. If you look at a sector like the energy sector, it's 45% of the total is coming from private sources. But in the water sector, it's 9%, and that's 9% of not very much. So there are real issues here across these different fora where I would argue the major risks that we all face in terms of the underpinning importance of water to our health, to our education, massive impact on gender equality, to our wider prospects of human development, is just not being taken seriously. It's not considered investable. So why do I think? Oh, and I wanted to say though that all sounds rather negative. If you don't always see this, so I wanted to give a counterexample of where it's very clear that it's understood. So we recently did some polling in the UK with a reputable organisation, but I won't mention the name. I would have done if it was Gallup, obviously. So we interviewed people in the UK about their attitudes to this area because it's being neglected, right? It's not being taken seriously. That's what I'm arguing. But a quarter of people thought water, sanitation, and hygiene was the most important issue for overseas aid to be invested in, and over half ranked it in the top three. And that meant that it was actually, by a long margin, the most popular choice because people were given a long list of areas to choose between. 7 out of 10 thought the UK government should invest in minimising the impact of climate change, with over half choosing to prioritise water, sanitation and hygiene. And 97% thought it's essential that hospitals have access to clean water. Contrast that with the reality I was talking about earlier. So overall, as I said, it's the most popular choice by a mile, and yet it's not getting the finance, it's not getting the policy, it's not getting the political backing, it's not the top choice of policymakers. It's just not happening. So why am I telling you all this now? It's because if I look at the data set that we have in front of us here, the WISE impact scales, I think this is a fantastic tool to take this message out to a wider audience and really communicate and quantify the impact of the lack of water, sanitation and hygiene on the human experience. It really gives you credible information. And so I wanted to end this leave you with an encouragement that you all reflect on the audiences that you can reach, and maybe the ones that you are comfortable reaching, and maybe the ones that you don't always move out to, and perhaps outside the water sector, and think about, could you be taking this message to a wider audience, and can the WISE impact scales help you do that? Because I think they can. So with that, and think about impact, and let's make a difference to this huge global problem. And with that, I'm now going to hand you over to the matriarch of the, as you said, Professor Sera Young of Northwestern University, although I was just learning temporarily of Cambridge, UK, Cambridge. So I hope you're enjoying your time in this country. Over to you, Sara. Thank
you. Thank you, Tim. Thank you all. The moment is upon us. It's fantastic to be here with you, with everyone online, in this beautiful space with the TLC of Gallup. So it's an exciting moment, and I think it's time to dive in. So you all have the report on your desks. You're welcome to touch it now. And it should also be available to those of you online. And the first thing that I want to say is that this is the work of many. I mean, it's almost 10 years coming, and there have been so many people who have, I'll extend the metaphor, who have parented this into what it is. It's really, I see you, I appreciate you, and I acknowledge all the inputs that have gone into this. So for those of you less familiar with the WISE scales than, say, I am, I will tell you that they are basically 12 questions that capture universal experiences with water. There's a scale called the HWISE scale that's there for measuring household level experiences. And the same items are used in the IWISE scale, the Individual Water Insecurity Experiences scale. And those are targeted at the individual. The seed for these scales was planted, as I said, 10 years ago when I was in Kenya. So I was doing a large food insecurity study. I was talking with women about their concerns, and while food was on their mind, water, as it turns out, was also very important. So this woman was describing to me how you can't quite see because you're face on with her, but she's very pregnant, and she's going to fetch water. Even though if you're familiar with the sim tank, you'll spot one behind her. And I was a keen baby assistant professor at the time. Let me just also measure water stuff. We're doing a great job measuring food stuff. How do we do this? And I turned to the literature, and I started learning about water security. And the term water security is a term that covers all manner of sins. It generally talks about at least one of the 4 pillars of water security when people are talking about water security. It's either the physical availability, and you can see physical availability is in green. We're pretty good at measuring that. There's access. Can you get to the water? We're pretty good at measuring infrastructural access. In terms of use, the 3rd pillar, we can understand if water is risky or not, if it's contaminated. And then the 4th pillar is reliability or stability. And what I wanted to do was to measure access, use, and stability across time, this more like holistic, the experience of water insecurity. But I couldn't find such a measure. So if we go back to this woman, she had infrastructural access. I mean, there's a sim tank right there, but her mother-in-law wasn't letting her use it. Lake Victoria was sort of just there. There was physical water there, but still she had to go and fetch water, and she ended up going into premature labor with, great risk to both herself and to her eventual baby. So, necessity being the mother of invention, that's where the journey began. And, I was really, like, as Jeremie was saying, sort of copying from the playbook of what FAO has done and many contributors have done with measuring experiences of food insecurity. So we track progress in food security for the world. Gallup measures it every year in roughly 140 countries by asking about people's experiences with access and use and reliability of food. And that's what we've done with the WISE scales. So there are, I would say, 4 key features of the WISE scales that make them kind of unique. And the first is that they're more precise. So, the sort of tagline of the SDGs is leave no one behind. But if we're measuring at the level of the household, we don't see as clearly who's being left behind. it was really a delight to see the IWISE scale recommended by Emory University and the JMP program for being useful for targeting or for measuring progress towards SDG 6.1 and SDG 6.2. A second feature is that the WISE scales are more holistic. So we capture experiences with drinking, but it's not just drinking, it's also other forms of consumption. So there are questions about cooking. There's also questions about hygiene, as well as the psychosocial burden of problems with water. So we can say that we are going beyond just access to drinking water with this scales. The third key feature is that these scales bridge to other sectors. So Tim alluded to that a little bit, and you'll hear also from the World Bank when they're talking about how these data are useful, they are useful for measuring water insecurity. Water insecurity, I think we all agree, is of intrinsic value. But think about like myself as a nutritionist 10 years ago, I wasn't thinking about water, but I can pull nutritionists in by saying like, okay, we have these great data that tie dietary diversity to water insecurity or food insecurity to water insecurity. We can tie water insecurity to physical health indicators like HIV viral load. We can tie water insecurity to mental health and to economic prosperity. So these data help to bridge sectors. And then lastly, these data can permit global comparisons. And you'll see this in the report, you'll see this elsewhere. These scales, as far as we've seen, are reliable, equivalent, and valid in high-income countries, middle-income countries, and low-income countries. We have some work to do on tweaking some of the cutoffs, but these are working globally. And it's for these, I would say, 4 reasons that the scales have had a pretty rapid uptake. Right now, they've been used in more than 50 countries by more than 100 organizations to really get at the human experience of water. On Friday, which was World Water Day, it was a complete honor to be hosted by the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C. It's the largest think tank there, where we released these one-pagers. And I need to thank WaterAid here, some of their staff had really encouraged me to release these. So there are now sort of snapshots of 40 countries with nationally representative data collected mostly by Gallup. And those data are now, you can play with them. So they're visualized and you can interact with them on the Center for Strategic and International Studies websites. And to the report, I will not stand before you and read this to you. You can do that yourself. But I just wanted to flag for you what we tried to do here was to break it into bite-sized pieces that would be interesting not just to water people, but to people who care about climate, who care about gender, who care about prosperity and health. And those are the themes that I will just highlight a couple of my favorites for you. And with each of these themes, there's a key message on top, so TLDR, to skip to the abstract is at the top. So if you care about advocacy, you can see that data from the WISE scales can be used by community members to advocate for resources. This is one of my favorite stories. I call them the ladies of Walgett. I hope you're out there. Thank you, ladies. There have been problems in this town for years, and people have been telling stories. They've been measuring the salinity of water, but it wasn't until community members themselves measured food and water insecurity and then wrote a report that suddenly people were listening. And it wasn't just some people were listening. The Australian Broadcasting Corporation covered this on the national news, 7:30 p.m. news. And then the minister came. I mean, the problems aren't fully solved, but this is like evidence that these data are actionable. We hear about climate, and I think this is a place, well, let me back up. So we have some great data, thanks to Gallup, where we have geospatial coordinates on roughly 40,000 people's water insecurity experiences, which means we can map climate activities, floods, droughts. We can also map conflict onto these experiences of water insecurity. But what I don't think we've done enough is to tie water to climate. I mean, at COP28, we had a session, we said, if climate change is a shark, water is the shark's teeth. But what we can see is it's these experiences of being worried about water, of having problems cooking what you need to, that really was where the problems manifest. We're seeing governments now use these data to target programs. So in Nuevo Leon, in the north of Mexico, we've signed an agreement with the government where they're measuring people's water insecurity to understand where poverty is and see if the poverty alleviation programs that they put in place are having an impact. And my last example comes from the implementation of this of the Y scales to see impact. So if you're in the water sector, you know that it's easy to count boreholes and say, like, look, we've done a thing, there are 3 boreholes here. But to see if people's lives are changing, that's a different story. And the value of these experiential measures has been recognized by organizations like Charity Water, like Helvetas. The World Bank is using this in some large interventions in India to see, like, okay, what's the before and after? What's the return on investment? Where are there problems still, even after we've done the intervention? So with that, I will say this is not like done and dusted, as the Brits say. We are really just beginning. In the concluding chapter of this report, we talk about 4 types of activities in which we're engaged, and many of you in this room are engaged in these activities. So the first is data collection. There's ongoing big projects. The second is regional networks. We have started a really robust, I think I describe it as vivacious, regional network in Latin America and the Caribbean. All of you are welcome to join. There's an email address for joining it. But we're looking forward to starting one for the African region as well, so we can have south-to-south collaborations. We have lots of research happening, and in collaboration with a number of organizations, we're working on developing a new tool to measure WASH in institutions, to develop a tool that would be useful both for healthcare facilities, schools, and for incarcerated people. So with that, I'm going to turn it to 2 leading ladies in the WASH sector who have recorded comments. They couldn't make it, but I appreciate you for listening and look forward to talking with you all during drinks afterwards. Thank you.
Greeting from Singapore. My name is Aude-Sophie. I'm the lead economist covering the East Asia and Pacific region for the water sector at the World Bank. Here in East Asia and Pacific, there is really a recognition of the centrality of water for development, for climate adaptation. And it's really a very broad recognition in the sense that it is the too much water that floods bring to many countries of the region, the too little, the drought, and the too polluted, a question that is quite salient for all the countries of the region, really. There is recognition of that. There is also recognition that this lack of data is also an hindrance to understanding how water relates to other outcomes, for instance, nutrition, health, education. That does eventually come to constrain the type of intervention we can have in the sector, because, of course, the arbitration that are being made between different type of funding allocation, different type of prioritizing. And while water is important, there are other sectors that also require important investment, for instance, in the area of energy. So certainly better data, more refined, that provide a more integrated perspective about what households are really experiencing beyond strictly the access, beyond the quality of the water, whenever this is actually available, is really something that is especially useful for organizations such as ours. And we're definitely trying to push this agenda within the organization, trying to extend the questionnaires whenever possible in survey, but also using high-frequency surveys. So, for instance, cell phone-based survey, and that the World Bank also has developed for a number of the region, including the Pacific, trying to systematize the use of such data so that we do have eventually at our disposal such information. And I really can only commend Professor Young and all the team that put so much effort in developing such useful tool, and pushing forward in a very systematic manner the process, so that we can all benefit from having those questions that are disposal, from having the validation, the standardization that can really help tell that story in a much more nuanced way and bring that story to a non-water specialist audience, and really bringing a much higher political prioritization of water, because this is ultimately what we're talking about here, in the sense that convincing people from the sector is not necessary. It is convincing people outside of the sector, where most of the decisions are being taken that affect the resource, that affect how water security will end up playing out in the next decades to come. So whether it is reform of subsidies, energy, agriculture, there is really a lot of decisions that are not at all decisions that the water sector can influence. But with better data, better analytics, we can really elevate how much of a priority it is for the well-being of citizens, for the well-being of future generations.
Good evening, and I hope you're having a lovely time there at the Shard. My name is Rachael McDonnell. I'm the Deputy Director General at the International Water Management Institute, and water security is part of our vision and our mission. But as we look at diagnostics for water security, how often are they defined in terms of access to services, about provisions and leakages and all sorts of diagnostics that really doesn't get to the heart of how individuals, particularly the most vulnerable, experience water security. And we are particularly pleased to be working with Sara and the team using the HY scale in our thinking and in the work that we undertake in the Global South, where we are very much based. And so is it about people worrying about water, or have they been able to wash their hands, or have they been able to use it for food, or just capturing how they experience water is really, really important as we develop new ideas, new solutions, new evidence, as we influence policy. And some of the countries and the regions and the river basins that are particularly being impacted by climate change. It's no use just using these broad quantitative terms that would normally come in water security. We need to be able to bring that experience of people into our thinking, into our planning, and into our discussions with government. So we are particularly pleased to be working with the Y scale. We're also using it to link it to food security. Now, it always makes so much lack of sense that we have water and we have food and we have different ways of measuring the security of that. And yet people, they will often experience both at the same time. They really don't care about which discipline it falls into or which sector and all of that. It's how they experience it. And we are really beginning to think about how we can bring together food insecurity and water security insecurity, some of the core areas that IWMI works on as we work with agriculture production, water use in agriculture production, but particularly that way people have access to food, the quality of the food, and also that access to water. So we are going to be continuing to work with Sara and the team going forward. We see many different areas in which the H scale, HY scale will come into our work, and we are delighted to continue to support it. So have a wonderful evening tonight. I so wished I could have been there, but unfortunately commitments are keeping me somewhere else. And we look forward to taking this forward in our work and further developing that linkages, particularly between water and food security. Thank you.
Turn a bit this way. Good afternoon, everyone. These are high bar stools, and my awkwardness shows that I don't go to the bar at all. You know, I could have fooled you. First of all, thank you that was a wonderful session that we had before, and huge congratulations to the speaker and to Sara and the huge team. And a huge thanks to Gallup for hosting us here. I badgered Andrew to invite me once to your offices because, well, it's the Shard and it's amazing. And the hospitality is also quite amazing. Thank you for inviting us here. And to Sara to invite us all, the panelists, and me to moderate the session. So I'm hoping we can wrap up our discussion here on this side of the room in 15 minutes so we can take Q&A from the audience. I'm delighted. My name is Suneetha Kadiyala. I'm a professor of global nutrition at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And I'm here joined by Sara Viviani, who is a statistician for food security and nutrition at the Food and Agricultural Organization. Andrew Roby, he says only his mother calls him Andrew, so it's Andy for all of us. And he's a senior water security advisor for the FCDO. And Zeina Jamaluddine, who is a research fellow at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and we all know Sera Young. Thank you. So I have a series of questions for each of you, and I will... Oh, Sara is sitting right next to me, so I'll start with you. Yeah. Sara, you are a statistician at FAO, and you have played a key role in the evolution of FIES, or the Experiential Scale for Food Insecurity, in becoming an SDG2 indicator. So how have these measures of experiential food insecurity helped us to understand the human experience of food insecurity, as well as the progress towards SDG2, and what can the Friends of Water Scales learn from it?
Thank you very much. Yes. Okay, so my name is Sara Viviani. I'm a statistician, so mostly methodological data person. It's an honor to be here and to see how actually data are used to really make a difference, make an impact. I will start by answering this question by saying that I like very much the word human. We are talking about humans, human research, and so was the history of FAS, experience-based scale to measure access to food. It all started in late 80s at Cornell University through an anthropological research. So essentially, researchers at Cornell University wanted to understand what does food insecurity and lack of access to proper food of proper quantity and quality means. And so they started by asking questions to people by retrieving from them what is the experience, what do they go through when they experience food insecurity. And starting from this very comprehensive and in a way simple research question, these experiences ended up to be found to be universal. So after some decades, there was a publication of a study in 2006 where they actually, it was demonstrated that these scales, these questions composing the food insecurity experience-based scales can be used globally in different contexts to actually capture the access to food. So then the next step that was pursued by FAO was to make these tools also from an analytical point of view really comparable across different cultures and different countries. In this context, also the experience with Gallup was really helpful because we ended up to be able to access data from more than 140 countries in all the world. And this data helped FAO to really develop a methodology to make this data really comparable and really to do not only country monitoring, but also global and regional monitoring. I wanted also to say that a good feature of the food insecurity experience-based scales, and also we are now studying together with Professor Young also the IWMI scales is the data disaggregation. So you can really target the most vulnerable among not only having a global assessment, but within each country and within each context, also to really understand what is the condition of subgroups in the population that are more affected. And this is one of the key features that also brought the indicator to monitor SDG 2. In terms of how, we can collaborate, we can join forces to also take advantage of our own experience also from the WISE group. The collaboration has already started, so we already, since 1 year, we are in close collaboration, cross contact with the group to maybe strengthen the aspect of global comparability. So in order to make this indicator also globally comparable for data disaggregation and data dissemination, which is also.
Thank you, Sara. That's very clear. The evolution of FIES and HYs and IYs are quite comparable, and that was the intent also, as Sara told us. Thank you very much. I just wanted to note that we did start 10 minutes late, so I hope you can stand the idea of cutting into 10 minutes of your reception, although there is amazing mangoes and whatnot out there. So Zeina, you have been part of the WISE scale, using WISE scales in humanitarian contexts, especially in Lebanon. Could you tell us a little bit more about your experience in using this, the scale itself, and what you did with the data, and maybe you can reflect on how various contexts, even with Lebanon, mattered or not or differed. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And actually, it's a very nice segue from what Sara was saying. So as you said, I was at the beginning working on food insecurity among Palestinian refugees in Lebanon, and could start hearing all the issues about water and food. And this is where we started to collaborate with Sara. And in fact, when we started to validate this water insecurity scale specifically, we were able to detect differences from within camps of Palestinian refugee camps of water insecurity experience, with a close proximity of the host national Lebanese that had a completely different experience on water insecurity, where in fact, inside camps, 25% were interrupting their work and plans. Outside of camp, which is 5 minutes away, only 5% would interrupt their work and plan due to water. And so food insecurity scale was very able to detect separation and disparities among communities. The other element where we tried to look at is within Syrian refugees across time when it came to COVID-19. We did quick surveys every month on a panel to see the impact of COVID-19 on Syrian refugee access to work and how this impacts water, food, and we were able to detect seasonality from the water insecurity scale, where it was dry versus wet season. We also, at the beginning of this, we were able to associate it with COVID-19. So households that were more food and water insecure were more likely to have COVID-19. And reflecting on the humanitarian emergency as a whole, if I want to say a big message is that currently with what's happening in Gaza, so we know very well that data is very scarce in humanitarian settings, and there is some indication that around 7 liters per person per day is what people are able to access in Gaza. However, this data is only available in the south and nothing is coming from the north. And as we know, measurements and how are we going to measure this, how are we going to intervene in this humanitarian catastrophe also involves understanding how people are experiencing with water, not because of anything, but because we're going into a more summer season. And in fact,
we know that Gaza had very high levels of vaccination, but in the fact where we have 7 liters per person per day, where there are 500 people using one toilet, experience with the water insecurity interventions and water insecurity need to be actually promoted, and because this is where infectious disease is going to rise. And this is where I talk about sectors not talking to each other, because in humanitarian we have the food, the water, the nutrition sector. Nutrition taxer today talking about people dying from famine, however it's also dying from dehydration, and they both coming together. So we need to quantify this and push more with that aspect. Sorry for interrupting.
Thank you. That was very articulate, and you also answered my next question on what does this mean for broader humanitarian settings. And data is so important to understand the nuances between hosts and refugee populations and other settlements and so on. And that may change over time too. It's not the same on day 1 of a conflict to even day, year 10. We know that some of these camps persist and so on. So, like with food insecurity experience scale, I think HYs and IYs, I think they have a huge potential in informing us on the situation, monitoring, but also on how to intervene and who to target for these interventions. So now to Andy. We are seeing highway scales, HYs and IYs being taken up by large NGOs and being used, as Sara told us earlier. But also USAID apparently is using them across its institution to measure various things. Of course, to understand the impact of various things and monitoring water access and insecurity. So what do you think Y-Scales bring to the table for FCDO, in addition to how you have been viewing, measuring, monitoring water insecurity?
Yeah, no, great question. How come we funded it and we're not yet using it? And I think that's because we work through... You can, and I will say we are using it, but we're using it, of course, through our many partners that we fund, and we've been encouraging them to do so in all sorts of ways. I think this is, though, the moment to really push it. And I'd like to invite Sara to come and talk to my FCDO colleagues about this in particular. Because as a civil servant, we are driven by evidence, right? We believe very sincerely that you can't manage what you don't measure. And we've been guilty of measuring the wrong things in the water sector. We've been measuring infrastructure and access. We've been looking at pipes and not at people. And I think that's what HYs, that's what I found attractive about HYs. It's one of the few consumer-based measures of water insecurity around the world. And I think the way it's been rolled out and taken up by Gallup, thank you very much, Gallup, for doing this, because it's given us an assessment of what's going on in the world. And this is where the gap lies. I think Tim alluded to it earlier. We're not taking water insecurity seriously globally. And that's because it's not yet political enough. It's not driven by citizens. And I think you just have to look, most of you, I guess, are based in the UK, at what's happened lately with our rivers. Water's become political. The MPs' inboxes are full of letters. I wrote several of them myself with a little bit of inside knowledge. And you can see how that brings change because that comes up through whatever system is relevant to your country. And we are interested in that change. And I think HYs needs to be now used as a tool for political change, to push water up that agenda, to make it relevant to the food and the health sectors, to the economic sectors. We want treasuries to be taking water seriously. We've got various programs that we're working on. The Water Tracker, which is looking at climate impacts of water on national resilience. And we're trying to get that into the treasuries in the way that they're investing. We've got the Resilient Water Accelerator, which is looking at trying to develop new markets for water, not just the water that comes out of the pipe. We're looking at Fair Water Footprints, which is the one that's pushing accountability. And I think that's where this is particularly useful, because we want to, the civil society writ large has not been taking water as seriously as it should either. And we as funders have been guilty of that. I think it's very tempting to fund a few pumps and taps, and you get some great results. We've had 60 million people with access to clean water from 2015 to 2020. We've just done a legacy study of how many of those pumps and taps still have water running in them. And in some cases, it's as little as 50%. And that costs you, the taxpayer, a lot of money. I don't think that's a particularly good story. So what have we been getting wrong? We haven't been looking at the governance arrangements, the accountability arrangements. That's where I think WISE is going to be a very powerful tool in the right hands.
And you make a profound case for looking through the lens of the individual and the households and the experiences of them. Then pipes, how do pipes reach people is the issue, right? You were just looking
with water in them.
Yes, agree. Yeah, thank you so much. So we are making good time, although we were a bit behind. So I'll go to Sara now, and I'm sure I'll get some kind of an eye-popping, bold answer for this question. So Sara, you have corralled this, you have been many things, you are the brains behind this. What would you like to see come out of this event?
I mean, I'd like to start with my daughters thinking I do cool work, which is
good luck on that. I don't know if that's going to happen, but
absent that, world peace, that's sort of, goal number 2. Absent that, generally, for people to think differently about water. I mean, we have been thinking about water as important, but it's been pretty abstract. So we can think about water. I mean, I don't disparage measuring water, the physical availability. I think that the JMP drinking water ladder access is a great indicator. It's not bringing us the last mile. And so when we think about water security, if we ask and believe what people say when they're worried about water, and if we know that when people are worried about water, they do things differently, they're less happy, they're less healthy, they're less prosperous. If we can do that, this event will have been a success.
Right. So what would it take for that to happen?
Well, you listening to me today is a good start. I mean, sort of like a 3-prong approach, I would say, to making people think differently about water. And the first is to conceptualize it differently, to conceptualize it from the point of view of the human experience. The second is to measure it, so to use these scales. If I can encourage you to use these scales in the work that you're doing, that will generate more data. And then the third is to have globally, nationally representative data for the world. I mean, I say this every time, this is my evil plan. Like, we need to be working from the bottom up for communities to understand their own water insecurity, but we also need a top-down approach of collecting data that's comparably collected and comparable, so that we see, I mean, if water is so important to us, we should be having nationally representative data on water insecurity for all the 140 countries. And I can't think of a better organization to do that than Gallup.
There's out there too. Shameless plug. Yeah, and now let's turn to the audience. Let's take a few questions. We have about 15 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes. Just the first question from the room. Anybody has a question, query, comment? Yes, there. And if you could introduce yourself, that'd be great. Yeah. Sure.
Thank you, Professor Sera Young. These scales are fantastic. I work for WaterAid, but I work particularly thinking about the political barriers to getting water, sanitation, hygiene to communities and people, because it isn't the physical infrastructure that is often the barrier, as your scales so aptly show. It is a whole range of impediments and barriers that we're dealing with. And when we were talking about this, and you were talking to me about them just a few months ago, I was saying, you do understand then that the solution may well be much more political. It may well be much more challenging and much more difficult, and it may open up much more difficult conversations in those communities and in those countries and with those people. And I think, Lebanon is a very key example of where, whether in a crisis context or a conflict context, some really important questions, and we're seeing that around the world today. And so my question would be a little bit for this room and for colleagues online is, I think, how do we approach this process in thinking about how we're going to work on those barriers together, so that we're not sort of delayed in waiting for sort of this information and treating it as if it's sort of this separate information out there that doesn't belong to us. It's actually part and parcel of the work that we're doing. And I really valued your recommendation that we think about this both from grassroots up and also from top down. What are your recommendations for how we start to take this part of it forward? And that's to all of the panel and to Andy as well. Yes, thanks for your listening.
I'd like you, Andy, also to respond to that. That's that would be great. Yes, Glada.
Hi, I'm Glada Lan from the Environment and Society Centre at Chatham House, and we work with the Fair Water Footprints Partnership, the Glasgow Declaration, looking at water and trade. Couple of questions, because I've just looked at your set of questions, and I really like the holistic take on that, the human take on that, because measuring how many taps or how many pumps has not worked in the past, as Andy pointed out. But I wondered, what's the outlook for keeping that data up to date? Because it's obviously time and labor intensive. So do you envisage lots of organizations collecting that data or pooling it, or, I guess you want Gallup to do it again, but, how would it be kept up to date? And the other thing is, because we're particularly interested, and it plays to the last question about once it becomes more about the political economy, we're interested in mapping where industry, particularly those industries and agricultural sectors that are bound for export, are competing with local water sources. So, could this data be used to map onto existing trade and production data, for example? Could that work to show where the highest areas of competition were? Thanks.
Super interesting research question from us. One more question from the room, and then let's take panelists. If you can respond briefly, think of a succinct answer to these questions, and then we'll go online as well. Yes.
Yeah, thanks. Alan Nichol from the International Water Management Institute. I just wanted to ask, I guess it's the panel and Gallup, how far are we away from kind of turning this into a more real-time data environment, thinking AI, thinking big data, kind of building on your point, Glada, about, how operable or interoperable is this data environment? Thinking about the conflict in Gaza, in Sudan, and all the other conflicts, how can we create an environment where this brilliant data set is available more real time and shows the kind of almost daily changes in people's water insecurity as a result of conflict? Because I think that would be massively powerful, and probably we're on the kind of cusp of that sort of data environment. Just wanted to ask the audience and the panelists. Thank you.
So we have a set of questions. So the first one is about navigating politics of water security. So any of the panelists, a couple of them, if you can, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
The Foreign Office is about as political as it gets in the UK government internationally. But that gives us a potentially very positive role. And although I am from the ex-DFID side of the House, I have appreciated the role of diplomats. And the fact I can get into rooms that I didn't used to be able to get into, that I have actually 190 or so ambassadors and high commissioners who get into many more rooms than I would ever get into, and to make these points. And I've been part of developing a water learning journey for our diplomats. And I think that's the way I see Foreign Office going in the future, is using our voice, the role of Britain, although a little diminished lately. We're actually more independent of the European Union and can speak differently. And we need to be able to tell our story, what's happened domestically, and put that right, of course. And we are in the process of doing that. But we've also got to use our role on the global stage. And G7, G20, COPs. I go to most of them, and I inform the people that are there for the UK. And we need to be able to push WISE and this data set so that politicians in other countries are also recognizing that.
Yeah. And something to learn from FISE, how do Italians say it? I mean, food is also very political, and since I think there are a lot of lessons learned on how to navigate that. On that note, Sara, can you respond to this question from our colleague from Chatham House in terms of, thinking through the data from the trade and industry use and water insecurity? You can add food insecurity in there.
Yeah, definitely. Our approach has been as transparent as possible in terms of data sharing, but not only results sharing, but also micro data sharing. And so whenever possible, we make this information available not only on food insecurity, but also on other variables that help triangulate and make sense of, for example, where and how and the dynamics behind access to food. So that's one approach that I think we share in terms of philosophy. This is happening for SDG monitoring. So for SDG monitoring, this is more of a structural process. So it happens only once a year. But the food insecurity experience scale has been included also in other monitoring frameworks, such as emergency data and emergency within FAO. So in this sense, data are published on a monthly basis sometimes for countries that are really monitoring the progress. So that's one approach of looking at it. And we have also a good example from our perspective, our let's say goal is countries and communities to really own the tool. So in this sense, there has been a top-to-down approach in terms of transferring the methodology and the tool into surveys that are then actually implemented at governmental level. So one example is for Sri Lanka, where the tool was implemented in a daily actually survey. So it was possible to really monitor and track food insecurity on a real basis.
Thank you. So, but we can have more conversations during the reception as well. There are questions on humanitarian settings and how do you make, one is, of course, how do you make this real time? And specifically with relation to humanitarian settings. Joe Yates, I'm going to put you on the spot to see if there are any other humanitarian related questions from online that we can bundle and take together, because
maybe we'll show that.
Yes, and that was
I think.
Yeah.
So Aude-Sophie from the World Bank alluded to this in some of her comments, but the World Bank is doing this high frequency data collection in small island and developing states for this very reason. I mean, water is very labile, so it can change a lot. And there's a lot of, in fact, REDCap has just taken the IWMI in. So there is this possibility for high frequency data, and we should have that. But we should also have nationally representative data that shows us what's happening in the world. And I mean, $2 million is a lot of money for me. It's a drop in the bucket for a lot of organizations, and there's no reason that there's not, we're not bonding together here to make this happen annually. It happens for food insecurity experiences annually. We should have this also for water.
Okay. Joe.
Hello.
Yeah, you can.
We do have plenty of questions. Nothing on humanitarian, a couple of comments on humanitarian context. I'll put forward a few questions. So firstly, from Rajibul Islam, he's got two questions, so I'll let you decide who wants to take them. Firstly, how can researchers and policymakers tailor the 12-question HWISE scale to better understand and address country-specific water insecurity challenges like those in Bangladesh, where factors such as seasonal flooding, water contamination, and infrastructural issues play a significant role. Secondly, even some indicators like hand washing or bathing may have very few affirmative responses in certain areas. What approaches can be used to ensure that the HY scale captures these regional differences effectively, enabling more precise and efficient interventions for water security?
Is there any other question that is burning there?
There's lots of questions.
Well, not lots. Thank you, audience, for being so enthusiastic. But this is really the last round, and I would really urge the panelists to keep all your interventions short, 30 seconds each, and then to Sara for a wrap up. Yeah.
Okay, here's one more, a broad one, which I think is more looking forward to the policy environment. Aude-Sophie is from an anonymous contributor. Aude-Sophie shared some illustrative policy actions that these data could inform, but cautions that these will fall across different sectors that might not be traditionally seen as water intervention. So to what extent can the WISE scales help to raise the profile of water insecurity and bridge the gap between these different sectors towards actions?
Yeah. So, Sara, do you want to take any of the one on how do you take the country context and relevance of those country issues into this measurement? And finally, the policy one to anybody who wants to take 30 seconds for response. Yeah.
I'm happy to hear someone else besides me speak.
I can attempt an answer on countries. I think what countries need to be doing then something along the lines of doing HY scale more regularly within countries where they know that things are changing a lot, especially with droughts and all of that, with also a shorter time frame. So the HYs or the WISE scale, both of them have been used on a 12-month, but also on a monthly basis on different reference points. I think that would also be helpful in informing, because specifically seasonality is a huge issue that comes in with water. So if any of the advice would be then to tailor these data collection more regularly. The nice thing about the HYs 4 actually is also can be done on a phone with 1 minute, and HYs 12 is like 3-4 minutes. So it's a quick survey. It's not something that takes a long time and can be done over the phone. And so I think this is another element that you don't need to have huge, like everyone experiences water in different way and lack of water. And so they will totally quick to collect. Yeah,
thank you. I'm not an expert on WISE, but I do think, and I remember Martin Schuler mentioning this in a recent international conference on water, that water is a systems of systems problem. Actually, it's not a single system that we're dealing with, it's a system within systems. And if we're not, as the water sector, however you care to define that, talking and engaging with other sectors and coming with the solutions, then we are not going to solve this water crisis. We're going to be nowhere near. But I've been thinking about the index a little bit as you were talking, Sara, and thinking, actually, how do you get it to relate to other indices that we are currently using, and see if we can build those bridges. I don't believe in breaking it open and trying to ram it into another scale. I think we need a basket of indices, and this one should be a core one in any development program. Did I just kill myself? Have I just shot myself?
No. That's what Sara wants. A basket of indices and the top one on that, or the second one after FI. Yes. Sara, in 15 seconds. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
No, in terms of emergency situations, I wanted to comment on the fact that it is indeed another good aspect of these indicators is that they are somehow flexible. So as it was mentioned before, we can shrink the reference period, we can add follow-up questions in terms of how frequent was each experience, and even in terms of, let's say, possible future research, add questions to target really more severe crisis conditions. So that's another point I wanted to make.
Thank you. Thank you all for your questions and engagement online as well as in person. So I will leave it to Sara now for the wrap-up. And once again, a huge applause to the team who has put this event together. Yes.
So thank you all for your attention. If you weren't looking at us, you were probably looking at the beautiful view, which I can't fault you for. And this is the result of many people's work over many years, as well as funding. And for that, I especially want to thank Amana, who are funded by FCDO and Gates. You've been supporters from our very first moment of making the very first scale. So it means so much. Thank you, and I look forward to having this discussion over the next 10 years or more. Thank you.